My name is Harold Duncan. I'm a licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist in a private practice in North Dallas, at Preston and LBJ basically. I want to thank Jack Graham for the invitation to be here, and Jonathan Adkins has done a great deal to help set up, and Jeff as well, Brock and Blake and Tom, and who did I leave out? Did I let it? Come on in. Yeah. Oh no, you look great on camera. And I'd like for you all to I'd like to be introduced to my lovely and talented wife back in the corner, raising her hand there. I usually request that she sit in the corner and try to stay as much out of the way as possible. Not that that would do any good. And the not so lovely but equally talented Donnie Claxton. Donnie is a he's a technology guru. He's our web designer with our practice, and has a company of his own where he does a lot of very, very creative stuff. But I'm very, very happy to be here. The title of this series is Transformed Thinking, and you will understand more about that as we go through the lesson tonight. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and my hope and my prayer is that I will share some things with you all tonight, and if you choose to come back next week, that I will share some things that you're going to be able to use, that will be applicable in your lives and in your relationships and in your relationship with yourself, because we're gonna do quite a few things. If I can, yeah, a little preview of coming attractions over here. So next week, taking control of our thoughts. Then we got 3 lessons specifically on the subject of anxiety and depression and anger and fear. And probably some of you are not strangers to these challenges. The last 2 lessons are about connection, staying connected with the Father and staying connected with each other. As Jesus said, that the first and greatest commandment is to love God with all of your heart and soul and mind, and the second is like unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. So I think those 2 lessons to wrap up are going to hopefully tie a bow on the lessons. I have a tendency to launch into lecture mode, and I can do that very easily and not even pay attention to anybody else who's in the room. I don't really want to do that. I'd love to invite questions, comments, anything that you have to say to add to this lesson, because I don't have the final say on the matter, and would love to hear whatever you may have to say. I may tweak some thoughts or some questions on your part that would be important for you to get my attention. Do whatever you need to do to let me know that you'd like to say something. So thank you for being here. I really do appreciate your presence, and so we're going to start with something that you all know very, very well. That at the very beginning. Oh wait, I'm sorry. We'll get there in just a minute. I've got a legal pad that I want to pass around from my office. I send out every 2 or 3 weeks a little email blog thing that is on some subject, some aspect of psychology, counseling, relationships, and so forth. I'm not allowed to put anybody on there who hasn't given their consent. So that's what this is about. No pressure. If you'd like to receive this, I promise I won't blow up your inbox, but if you'd like to receive it, just print your name and your email address and a signature that will give me the consent to do that. Okay, back to Jesus. Very beginning of his public ministry, he went into the wilderness for a period of prayer and fasting. And my belief is this was not probably an uncommon thing for him to do. It was probably a very common practice. On this occasion, he stayed there 40 days and 40 nights, and Satan approached him. And so Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, that they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him up to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. That's Matthew 4. The account is also recorded in Luke 4. And in Luke's account, it is added there that the devil left him until a more opportune time. So he left, but he didn't stay away. And we know that, and we know that from personal experience as well. So we're gonna start off tonight talking a little bit about the human brain. We've never known a great deal about the human brain. It's said that psychiatrists have been the doctors who don't examine the organ that they are supposed to be experts in. And until recently, there have been very, very few opportunities for that kind of examination to take place. Today, we know more than we've ever known about the human brain, but we still don't know. We still don't know how much we don't know. We read a lot about the human genome, genetic codes, DNA that are responsible for so many aspects of that make us what we are and who we are. Physical, you see resemblances from generation to generation, resemblance in facial structures and looks, but also in body types and things like that. A lot of other traits. I'll share with you a story. I have an older sister who is adopted. And so she got a little bit older. She wanted to meet members of her biological family. And so she did. She was able to make contact with a half-sister who lived in another state. So my sister and her husband went to meet and to have lunch with her sister and her husband. And they sent us a picture of the four of them that were taken on that occasion. And there certainly were some facial and appearance similarities between my sister and her half-sister. But what was also pretty striking is that they were dressed exactly alike. They had never met each other. And they had on the same kind of chambray shirt with the little crafty things, the embroidery and things like that. And it's almost like they had texted each other and said, "What are you going to wear?" But they hadn't. And so I think the genetic predispositions are far stronger and go far deeper than anybody has ever known. But we do have genetic predispositions. And so when a person comes into my office for counseling, and I'm doing an intake kind of questionnaire, and this person, I'll ask them about alcohol patterns or drug patterns or depression patterns, anxiety patterns, but I'll also ask about your family. Is anybody in your family depressed or anxious or have a problem with alcohol and drugs? And so we just know more and more about genetic predispositions and the impact that it has on us than we've ever known before. Some of you don't know probably, I didn't see that I had these up there, but you get it, anxiety and depression. What you probably don't know is that they have isolated a baldness gene that some of us have. And so you can tell there because it's spelled out in red. And so that's maybe one of the reasons I don't want to have my genetic code done. So I'm not sure I'd like what I would find out about that. But there are some things that are pretty obvious to it. Only recently, in the past 20 years, and this is an important thing for all of us to keep in mind, that some of these findings are very, very recent. And it's primarily because we have a variety of brain scanning technologies that have never existed before. And so when a physician or a neurologist is diagnosing someone, they know what they're doing. They can look at a certain brain scan and they can tell if certain areas of the brain are active or maybe overly active, and they might be able to diagnose a person with anxiety from an overactive brain. Other areas of the brain may be underactive, and you might be able to diagnose depression from underactivity. You can also see which centers of the brain are activated by drugs and so forth. But formerly, that's one of the things we've learned, and we've learned in fairly short order, that our brain is in a constant state of change and development. Now, some of you probably remember hearing some of the same lessons that I did when I was in school and growing up. It was widely believed not too long ago that our brains had finished their developmental processes by the time we were in late adolescence or early adulthood. By that time, it was thought we're pretty well locked in, and there's little hope of changing the way that we think and we feel and behave. Now, if you listen carefully, you'll still hear that sometimes, but the people who are in the medical and scientific communities know better than that. Also, it used to, okay, I got to catch up with myself here. It used to be believed that every person is born with a finite number of brain cells. And if we do anything, I remember this talk in connection with the alcohol talk when I was in school. So if you drink, or if you drink too much, then you're going to be killing off brain cells. And you know what? When you kill those things off, they're never coming back. And so you just better watch yourself. And I like the lessons as it related to alcohol. But what we know now is that we have an infinite number of brain cells, and what we've learned is that the brain can generate new cells until the end of our lifespan. So similarly, many scientists believe that the brain is unalterable. And once it is broken, and by whatever means, by trauma, by an accident, by stroke, or by whatever means, that it cannot be fixed. Now, recent discoveries have let us know that that's not altogether true. Not every traumatic event, not every damage that's done to the brain is going to be fixed, but recent discoveries have convinced us to think differently. And evidence now shows that the brain remains plastic throughout life, and it can rewire itself and learn new things, and it can create new pathways. We're going to talk a lot more about neural pathways tonight. So under certain circumstances, the brain can even create new cells. Process is called neurogenesis. And so what I want you to know in my field, these findings are huge. They are huge because as a counselor, we see people all the time who are discouraged. They are frustrated. They have made serious mistakes in their life. They've made bad choices. They have hurt themselves. They have hurt other people. And they honestly believe that there is really no way to consistently change their behavior or to change the way that they think. And so it's really gratifying now for us to be able to tell them that's not true. It used to be believed, and it was believed for hundreds and thousands of years that it was true, but it is not true. And so just a couple of things. I'm going to pause. I'm at least going to slow down and give you a chance to jump in if you'd like to jump. The way that the brain has been studied over the years has kind of come in three different ways. It was studied years ago as an electrical phenomenon, and that's not wrong. There are a lot of electrical processes that go on in the human brain, but it was not complete. And so then they added a chemical component, and a lot of brain functioning was learned to be of a chemical nature, and that too was not inaccurate, but it was also incomplete. Today, what scientists are talking about are neural networks. These are patterns of thinking that lead to patterns of behavior. And so when somebody thinks, well, I've behaved this way all my life, I can't change that, that's not true. And I can tell them very absolutely and confidently, no, you're mistaken about that. That is not true. And somebody will say, well, I've thought these things all my life. I'm not going to be able to change the way I think. And I can say with the same amount of assurity, that's not true either. You can change the way you think. That can change the way that you behave. And even, and this sounds a little bit strange to a lot of people, even change the way that you feel. Well, you say, this is the way I feel. This is just the way it is. I know what you're saying, and yeah, it is the way it is. However, by changing the way that we think, by changing the way we behave, we can also change the way that we feel, and there's good evidence to that. So when you talk about neural networks, think about LBJ Freeway. Okay, you may not want to think about LBJ Freeway, but we live close to LBJ and went through all of the revamping, remodeling process. I was told one time when they were right in the middle of it, of the reconstruction, that the sun, according to scientific sources, the sun is going to burn out in 5 billion years, and that means they're going to have to finish LBJ in the dark. Okay. Somehow they finished before the sun burned out. But what we know is that we can modify our neural networks, and the good news is that much of it is within our power to control. Okay, now let me pause and let me give you an opportunity to jump in, because I'm afraid if I don't give you the opportunity, you may not jump. Anybody got a thought or a question or something to add to what I said?
So if the brain's cells are able to regenerate, does that mean that we're going through a period of continuous regeneration throughout our lifetime?
Yes. That doesn't mean that every problem that we have is going to be able to be solved with the regeneration. But scientists have confirmed that the brain regenerates until you take your last breath. Yeah. And that's far, far different than what was ever believed or known before and what was ever taught. Yes?
So when you say that changing the thinking changes your brain patterns, does that mean that it changes your brain chemistry with it also?
I think it has the potential to change the brain chemistry. I'm not as up on the brain chemistry as I am the neural pathways. What I do know about brain chemistry, because this is a lot of people who we see in counseling also are on some kind of medications, anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications. And what a lot of those are designed to do is to change the brain chemistry. So what we know is that intense levels of stress over a prolonged period of time can change the brain chemistry for the worse. Okay, so serotonin is the big actor in depression and anxiety. There are lots of other chemicals, but what's been known for years is that if we can increase the levels of serotonin in our brain chemistry, then generally that's going to help us feel less anxious and less depressed. Even scientists don't really know exactly why that or how that happens, the mechanism by which it does. But we do know that everybody gets stressed, and a lot of our stress is maybe mild to moderate or maybe major, but only for a brief period of time. But what they've learned is that intense stress over a prolonged period of time, that's the double whammy, and that can result in some altered brain chemistry. Other thoughts? Yes, sir.
I was thinking you have, sometimes you make the same decision on a certain thing, and it seems like you're making an imprint. If this is the path, every time I come to this point, I'm going to go this way, I'm going to go this way. And I just wondered, you're saying it can be changed someplace along the line that you don't
Yes,
go
sir.
that way anymore?
Absolutely, and you've been reading my notes. You've been reading ahead in the text. But
We had a text.
you're exactly right. Now, you've nailed it, and we're going to talk more about that before the class is over tonight. Yeah, and it is like getting in a rut. So we live our lives, and we come to this fork in the road. We'll show you a video here in just a minute that illustrates that. If we're all are accustomed to 95% of the time taking that right fork in the road, then the left fork becomes more and more difficult to take. But it doesn't mean it can't be changed if that's a healthier direction for us to go. Yes?
You were talking about the serotonin?
Serotonin?
Serotonin.
Mhm.
Medications for that, I understand.
Yes.
Do those kind of make you a little too passive, though, or you're not working like you ought to work, or you're taking some of the edge off?
You know, that's a fear that a lot of people have, and along with that, a lot of people are afraid that if I take medication, then I won't feel anything. And I don't, you know, anxiety is the highs and depression is the lows, but I don't want to just be like a zombie and not feel anything. My history, my experience is that when a person is accurately diagnosed and adequately treated medically, that's not a problem. But one of the challenges with medication is what may work really, really well for me may not at all for you, because our body chemistry is different. And so that's sometimes it's a trial and error kind of thing. But there are some legitimate fears that people have about taking medications. Yes, sir.
I know that your liver cells also regenerate, but I've heard from liver surgeons that they don't. It's mush. It's just mass. It doesn't really do anything.
Okay.
It's, basically worthless. So, obviously, when the brain cells regenerate, they help based on what you said. But is it like 100% or 50%?
I don't think I've read any percentages about that, and so I can't respond to that question. And I don't know nothing about no livers either, so don't. No, it's a good question, and I do know, and we're going to talk about brain exercises in a minute. Probably a lot of you do brain exercises. That can help with things like memory. It can help with things like retention. It can help with things like quickness of recall and things like that. But in all areas of the brain, this is not, it's not a cure-all. It's not an end-all or a be-all to that. There was another hand up.
Just reading the definition there, neural networks reminds me of something I was exposed to years ago, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah.
Same concept.
Well, I never got into neuro-linguistic programming. I know some people who did and got a lot out of it. Just from the title, it sounds very similar to this. And I know that one of the processes is mirroring, another person that you're talking and being able to connect with them that way. But I've just told you everything I know about neuro-linguistic programming, so that's it. Yes.
Well, it sounds like you might be getting ready to touch on it, but you said about taking the left turn.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what my doctors and my friends have said, like when you're brushing your teeth, use your other hand once in a while. If you're
Exactly.
at work and you always park on this side,
Yeah.
park on this side.
Yeah. It's
And
the same, exactly the same principle. You know, and I do this. I've been doing this for several years because I read it several years ago. When you're shaving in the morning, if you always start on your right side, then alternate that.
Okay, so
Start
that
on your
is-
left side, and it's not difficult if you think about it. But even something that's subtle, parking in a different space and so forth, something that's subtle keeps the brain kind of alert and keeps it from. Yeah, from stagnation. Yeah, that's a good.
Well, change is not bad then, is it?
No, in fact, even though some of us think it is, and
We hear the word all the time, change is bad.
we resist change to the nth degree, but no, in this case, change is something that really invigorates the brain, and so. Yeah, so we come to the title of the class. Well, see, I keep coming up with these things I forgot were there. When the network changes, everything changes. So just like a network of roads in our brain, this is, and I will tell you, I've been doing counseling for over 35 years. This is the most exciting finding that has happened in my field since I've been in this field. And I don't want to be 30 years old again, but if I were 30 years old again, this is a field I would go into. There is so much that it's going to just explode over the next few years, and we're going to learn stuff that we don't even know now. So transformed thinking really comes from Romans 12:1 and 2, where Paul says, "I beseech you, therefore, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed." How? By the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The U version states it like this: don't become like the people of this world. Instead, change the way you think. That's it. That's what we're talking about. Change the way you think. Then you will always be able to determine what God really wants, what is good and pleasing and perfect. So it's not only possible, it's necessary. It's essential that we change the way we think. And so then we come back to the whole topic then of brain plasticity.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
video proves one very important thing, and that is if you can speak with a British accent, you sound smarter than everybody else. Okay. You probably already know that. So that's one way you can change your brain, maybe, is to change your accent. But brain plasticity, or neuroplasticity, is a common term referring to the brain's ability to change at any age, for better or for worse. Not all change is going to result in what we want it to result in. But as you would imagine, this flexibility plays a vitally important role in our brain development and in shaping of our distinct personalities. And so changes, the good news is that much of this brain change is within our power to control. We are not at the, we're not. So some of you will know this, when you get a little bit older, sometimes you can't remember the words that you would really like to remember. Now, you probably are not there yet. Yeah, at the mercy. We're not at the mercy of the elements or just the powers, the forces that be. But every time we learn a new skill, and like you said, every time we do something a little bit different, and so you may take golf lessons and learn golfing skills a little bit better. You may learn a new dance step. It reflects, anytime you do something new, it will result in change in our brains, and new wires, new neural pathways give our bodies instructions as to how to perform that step. But it's also the same on the other, in the other direction. Every time we forget someone's name, or every time we think of a word that we can't quite pull up, it also reflects brain change. And there were some wires that may have been connected before the class began that for some reason had lost their connection when the class began. But as these examples show, changes in the brain can result in a lot of differences. Improved skills, also improved confidence, or the weakening of skills, or forgetting things. So all those certain brain mechanisms, okay. Yep. Yeah. Certain brain mechanisms tend to decline with age. There are steps that we can take to exercise our brains. So, for example, 50 years ago, not very many people exercised on a regular basis. People didn't go to gyms. There were not that many gyms to go to. People did not walk for the exercise value of walking. My mother had both of her knees replaced when she was later on in life, I guess in her late 70s or early 80s. And so I was visiting her one time, and I said, "Hey, Mom, why don't we just, beautiful day, let's go out for a walk. Let's just walk down the road." And she looked at me and she said, "Why?" And it was foreign to her. She couldn't understand any value that would have to her, in addition to the healing value. But now a lot of people, there was a revolution, a fitness revolution that happened several decades ago, and a lot of people, at least we have gym memberships, whether we use them or not, but a lot of people are very active and consistent in working out, whether that involves walking in the neighborhood or going to the gym and doing machines or stationary bikes or whatever. And so, as I mentioned this a minute ago, how many of you do involve yourself in brain exercises? And I'm talking about crossword puzzles, I'm talking about Sudoku, what else? Name puzzles, word games. How many of you do that on a somewhat regular basis? This is something that is really, really important. And near the end of my parents' lives, they would sit in their home in Tennessee, and I would call them at the end of the day, and one of the questions I would always ask is, did you finish your crossword puzzle today? So they actually got 2 newspapers, so they wouldn't have to fight over the crossword puzzle. So they would do the same crossword puzzle, but they were not going to do each other's. But those are examples of ways that we can energize and stimulate the brain. Let's see. There's another video here.
We are beginning to harness the brain's incredible ability to invent itself, then reinvent itself throughout life. This girl is a testament to the amazing resilience of the human brain. Young Jody Miller leads an idyllic life as a 9-year-old girl. You would never guess that she has undergone some of the most drastic surgery imaginable. Jody's first 3 years were textbook normal.
Happy birthday, dear Jody.
Then, about 6 weeks after her 3rd birthday, a storm of epileptic seizures took control of her brain.
She couldn't use her left arm hardly at all. She could barely use the left leg, seizing a good deal of the time, multiple types of seizures.
Ordinary life became impossible. Medicines did nothing, and the seizures threatened to turn fatal. Desperate, Jody's parents brought her to pediatric neurologist Eileen Vining.
We found her seizures were all coming from her right hemisphere. And we knew that there is virtually nothing else, nothing but Rasmussen syndrome that can produce that picture in a young child.
Rasmussen syndrome is a degenerative brain disorder that disrupts the electrical activity that makes our brains work. Tiny electrical explosions were flaring up in Jody's right hemisphere. As seizures became almost constant, she lost control of her left side. Only one radical treatment option remained.
We knew that she was never going to have her seizures controlled with medicine, and we knew that she and her family faced taking out that half of the brain.
Okay.
Dr. Vining recommended a daring surgery called a hemispherectomy. It would be performed by pediatric neurosurgeon Ben Carson.
The whole concept of taking out half of a person's brain would seem to most people impossible. Human beings are incredible creatures with a brain that is beyond belief in terms of its capabilities, to the point where we can take half of it out and still function in a normal way.
85% of our brain consists of the cerebral cortex, which is divided into 2 hemispheres, each with 4 main lobes. The cortex handles many of our higher functions. Areas on both sides control thinking, movement, and sensation. But the right side controls our left side and vice versa. Jody would lose almost all of her right hemisphere, and the cavity would fill with cerebrospinal fluid. The operation has to be performed with great precision to avoid damaging the parts of the brain that control Jody's life functions, like heartbeat and breathing. The surgery went flawlessly.
What we're looking at here is an image, an MRI, that was done on Jody after her surgery. And what it shows us is the fact that we removed her entire right hemisphere. And what we're able to see here is indeed her very normal left hemisphere and all the beautiful gyri of her cortex. And we can see right down the middle, the right hemisphere that was there is now replaced by fluid.
But how could Jody function normally with only one hemisphere? It's because of a miraculous ability of the brain called plasticity. Our brains can actually change shape, creating new connections between neurons or brain cells to replace lost or damaged ones. Jody's left brain started reconnecting almost immediately.
At least as good as this. And if I remember, he wore pink just like you. This young lady had half her brain removed, went home, I guess maybe 10 days later, and was already walking. She was ambulating. She was able to walk out of the hospital. And that's because her left hemisphere had such resilience, such plasticity. It was able to say, okay, something needs to move her left leg. Whoa. You gonna open it? Okay.
Jody continues to work on training her brain to overcome the slight paralysis in her left side.
But enough, now that's very good. You need to do that stretching stuff, honey. You know that, don't you? Are you doing enough of it? I think so. Atomic sentence.
The human brain is just an awesome thing, because every time I look at it, I say to myself, this is the thing that makes this person unique. It still is just such a wonderful thing to find a young person whose life now can move on, who's no longer having seizures, who's developing in a normal fashion. I take the good with the bad, and I say, this is a bad thing, potentially, that we have to do for an extremely good cause.
This is a good time to pause and see, do you have any reactions or thoughts or questions or comments to what we've talked, anything we've talked about so far, including the video?
I have a question. As a lay leader, and it is handy to know how the brain operates and how it is affected with trauma and stress and so forth. But as a lay leader, we don't diagnose somebody
Right.
and say, you've got PTSD or you've got
Right.
something wrong with your brain or
Right.
whatever. But it's very helpful to know about these things. In long-term biblical guidance with women that have multiple layers of stress and so forth, at some point, they are going to need some professional counseling. And as much as we try to expose them to that and suggest that, sometimes they are just adamant that they. But at what point do you say this is very necessary?
Thank you for that question. There are 2 or 3 thoughts that are going through my mind, if I can remember them. One is that I understand that mindset. I grew up very much in that kind of environment where, I'm going to show you another video, or I'm going to refer you to another video before we finish tonight about. It never ceases to amaze me. The Bible says we're fearfully and wonderfully made. How intricately, how beautifully, how perfectly our bodies are put together. And so, but in every situation, there are things, there perhaps anatomical things that don't work the way that they're supposed to, or over time, and you mentioned stress, there are decisions that we can make that are self-defeating decisions. There are pathways we can take that are not in our best interests and not consistent with biblical teaching either. And so I think it's important for people to know that perhaps some of the problems I'm having are a result of my poor decisions and my poor pathways. Now, not always. Maybe some of the problems I'm having are a result of some genetic predispositions. But, another thing I go back to is Luke. Luke was a physician. And God makes physicians too. And we don't hesitate, most people don't hesitate to go to a physician. And we don't think that faith and prayer are going to heal everything that is wrong with us. And unfortunately, I think some people have that impression about mental and emotional kinds of things. And so part of what I've tried to do over my professional life is to help educate people to the fact that where there is help available, whether it's physical help, mental, emotional help, any kind of help, I think we have a responsibility if we want to live a healthy life. And I think God definitely wants us to live a healthy life. He has created us for good health, physical health, and mental, emotional health. But when we go off track and we get off on one of these neural pathways that's not in our best interests, then I think there is help available. And I think it's not only the smart thing to do. I think it's the spiritually right thing to do, to reach out for help when it's there. You're not going to be able to convince everybody of that, and you may not even agree with that, with what I've just said. But I believe that psychology practiced well, practiced correctly, is not going to contradict the Bible in any. The longer I've done this, the Bible has support. It's like this. God knew this. How long ago? God knew this from the very beginning. We're trying to catch up with Him, and we're trying to, and we're doing a pretty good job. But like I said earlier, we still don't know how much we don't know. There's so much more, and so I don't know if I'm answering your question or if I'm just
I mean, I
going
will
in.
offer a little, like, if I recognize if someone is suffering from PTSD.
Yeah.
then I might tell them that there's a part of the brain that's not signaling
Yeah.
that the trauma is over.
Yeah.
You know, something like that.
That's good.
And that
I
will
like that.
help them realize that, oh, I'm not just going nuts.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is a
There's a
physical
reason. Yeah. And you don't have to diagnose, but what you can do is give observations. You know, when you say this, or when you act like this, or when you have these flashbacks, or whatever form they may come, you may say, I'm not diagnosing you, but I'm saying you have some characteristics and some symptoms that are similar to PTSD or depression or anxiety or whatever. And that's not being diagnostic, but when you know a person well enough to give them that feedback, that's pretty important to do, I think. Yes.
I've been running the cycling program for women for 18 years, and I can tell you that what I have seen is the same thing. Number one, they don't know who they are in Christ, what their role is as a woman, because the culture has gotten them totally confused, and they're running the program wrong. Their thinking is stinking, and so once you get them to know who they are as a person in Christ and a woman in this culture, which is very confusing for them today, and get them to relate to the opposite sex the correct way, they are healthy. It's all God's program, but we're not running it, and we're not discipling our women well enough. I've had 18 years of women. I don't know how many hundred people I have. I'm not bragging, I'm not saying it's by God's grace alone I do it, but I can tell you, I'm an old psych nurse. I can tell Madeline, listen, I'm a school nurse. I can see it in our kids. We need to get God's program running right for the male and for the female. And then we will have a healthy generation, much better than what we have.
Thank you. I think about this with my sister. I'm 67 years old. My sister's a year and a half older than I am. In the course of our lifetimes, my role in the family has not really changed that much. We grew up in a family where Dad was the primary breadwinner. Mom, after the children were born, she was the stay-at-home mom. And I'm still pretty much following in my dad's footsteps. But my sister has had all kinds of confusion, not knowing where she should be and where, who she is, and exactly what you described, because the roles of women have changed so dramatically.
You can be a career lady, but you've got to know how to do it. And the girls don't know how to do it, and they pick up the male role, and it makes the male mad. We got divorces all over the place. They could be prevented. I've prevented several. I can't tell you how many women come into my class, and they are even living in a different residence than their husband, and they get back together. It's really not hard. It really isn't hard. It's just knowing the program and doing it the way God has written it.
And I, I'm hearty amen to that, and thank you for that. Well, I'm going to try not to get too far afield, because I'm determined to not impose upon your time unnecessarily. So we're supposed to go until 9 o'clock tonight. Is that right? 9? That's just a joke. Come on. Come on. Lighten up. And people are heading for the door right now. Lock the door back there before they get to. I want us to be finished and to be leaving here by 7:30, 7:35, and I think that's enough for me to impose myself on you. Let's go back to Jesus. And so what does this mean to me? What does it mean to us? The primary truth is this. And you hear speakers say, if you don't get anything else out of tonight's lesson, get this. Well, I want you to get other things too, but I absolutely want you to get this. that we cannot control the thoughts that come into our minds, but we can absolutely control the thoughts that stay in our minds. So we're driving our car, we're seeing billboards, we're listening to the radio, we're seeing people on, other traffic and people on the side of the road. All kinds of thoughts can invade our minds, uninvited, but they're there anyway. That's not our choice. Our choice is, what are we going to do with those thoughts when they get there? We cannot choose what the thoughts that come into our minds, but we can control the thoughts that stay in our minds. Okay, let's talk about Jesus. And we know that if Jesus was going to be fully human, he could not avoid temptation. He had to be tempted if he was going to be able to understand us as we are tempted, and he was, and he does understand us. So we know how Jesus responded to Satan's temptations. He responded to each of those, "It is written, it is written, it is written." And I want to acknowledge one fact with you that I think we all know, but it's really vitally important that we grasp this and remember it. Satan is a pro at what he does. He is the best at what he does. He knows what he's doing. He knows me and he knows you intimately well. He knows our strengths and he knows our weaknesses. And we also know that his power is limited by God. God will only allow him to go so far, but Satan has a lot of power. Now, we also know, we've read the end of the book, we know who wins. And Satan doesn't win. We know what the outcome is going to be, but he gives us opportunity. He can make our lives miserable. Let me change the way I said that. He can give us opportunities to make our own lives miserable in the process. And what you were talking about with your women is a perfect example of that. So when Jesus was responding to Satan's temptations, remember what he did not say to Satan. He didn't say, you know what, Satan, you're right. I am famished. Well, the Bible tells us he was hungry, 40 days and 40 nights of fasting, and he was hungry. That's as much of an understatement, I guess, as you can find. But he hadn't eaten anything in 6 weeks. And so, but Jesus didn't say, you're right, Satan. I'm famished. I haven't had anything to eat in 6 weeks. I am fully human, and food is all I've been able to think about. I haven't been able to get it off my mind. I need something to eat right now. I deserve something to eat. It's ludicrous to even think about those words coming out of the mouth of Jesus. But you know those people, and I know those people. I don't just want it, I need it, and I deserve it, regardless of what the Bible says. Now, think neural pathways. You know people who think that way and have thought that way a long time. What Jesus did not say to the second temptation is, Satan, you're right again. I left the glory and grandeur of heaven for this. A little acclaim would certainly be nice and feel good. After all I've sacrificed, after all I am the Son of God. I don't think that's asking too much. Right now, nobody outside of Nazareth even knows who I am. Can't imagine those words coming out of Jesus' mouth, because they didn't. And that would have been totally contradictory to his mindset, to his neural pathways, the mind of Jesus. Jesus also did not say, you make a good point, Satan. Instead of being tortured and crucified and despised and rejected, I want to be adored. I want to be honored. I want to be praised. I deserve that. Not what he said. That's what we say. Not what Jesus said. So we can't even imagine Jesus talking that way, because we know he did not think that way. So one other thing I'm going to give you. Why did Jesus not answer in these ways? And I'm going to throw this in John 13 for there's no extra charge for this. Read John 13. It really is one of my favorite chapters. It's one of the chapters where Jesus washed the disciples' feet. And what it says before he took, of course the disciples were bickering. The disciples were doing what I just, said we can't imagine Jesus doing. Now, they were bickering among themselves, and they were very competitive. And I deserve to be on the right hand and on the left hand of Jesus when he comes into his kingdom. And so, read John chapter 13, because what the Bible says is Jesus knew who he was. Identity. People come into my office all the time, just like you said. And these are bright people, smart, well-educated, professionally successful people. Guy came into my office 2 or 3 weeks ago, 45 years old. He said, I have no idea who I am. No idea. Another guy did 2 or 3 months ago. This guy is he's a graduate of Harvard Law School. I don't know who I am. Doesn't have to do with intelligence, at least not academic intelligence. Okay, John 13 tells us Jesus knew who he was. He knew where he had come from. He knew where he was going. He knew his identity. He knew his purpose. And so what I like to say about this is, when I was growing up, maybe a teenager or a college student, it seemed like people who were trying to find themselves, you remember that? They would always go to Colorado. I think a lot of people were lost in Colorado. And so if you're going to find yourself, that's not a bad place to go, but I've got to get my head together. I've got to find myself in Colorado. One of the things I love about John 13 is that Jesus, when he was in the wilderness, he was not trying to find himself. He was trying to find us. He was trying to find us. He knew who he was. He knew where he'd come from. He knew where he was going. He didn't have any questions about that. So the question then becomes, what had Jesus just spent the previous 6 weeks doing? He was fasting and praying and devouring. He was eating, but he was devouring God's Word. And we know for a fact that Jesus had not spent the last 6 weeks dwelling on how hungry he was, how lonely he was, how thirsty he was, how miserable he was, how unfairly he had been treated. You know those people. I know those people, and maybe we are those people sometimes. Jesus did not spend that time, creating those neural pathways and digging those ruts deeper and deeper. I am so hungry, I can't think about anything else. I am so lonely out here by myself. I am miserable. And it's just not fair. What I think about this is that Satan made a major, major miscalculation when he came to Jesus. I think that Satan may have thought Jesus at this moment to be weak and vulnerable, but this was a moment when Jesus probably had never been stronger than he was. After spending 6 weeks in the wilderness, in communion with God, Satan came to him thinking that, okay, yeah, this is a good vulnerable moment for him. But he had probably never been stronger. So it should not surprise us that he answered the temptations as he did. It is written, it is written, it is written. That's where his mind was. That's where his neural pathways were. They were well built and well maintained. But I want to remind you too that his neural pathways didn't just happen the previous 6 weeks. He had been working on those, Mary and Joseph, and he had been working on his neural pathways all of his life. And Luke 2 tells us Jesus, when he was young and when he was 12 or 13, that he grew, from that point, he grew in wisdom, stature, favor with God, and favor with man. So, it isn't complicated. Let's see if I've got another thing. Okay, it isn't complicated to rewire our brains, but it doesn't just happen. It doesn't happen by itself. And it doesn't happen if we just sit back and wait for it to happen. It's something that we have to take action about and make happen. So I want to close with this thought, and I'll still entertain a couple of questions here, or thoughts or comments on your part. We indeed are fearfully and wonderfully made, and it honestly is beyond me. Looking at just the human body, not to mention the world and the heavens and all of the magnitude of creation, it's beyond me how somebody can honestly believe that it just happened. It just happened. I mean, I honestly don't understand that, although I know that there are a lot of people like that. So, his neural pathways have been well built and well maintained all his life. I don't know if you've seen this video, but I want to highly recommend it to you. TED.com has a video, and I don't know if you can see his name, Alexander Tsiaras, Tsiaras. But all you need to remember is the title of the video, Conception to Birth Visualized. Dr. Tsiaras is a mathematician. I don't know anything about his spiritual life or his background or anything like that, but he has one of the most amazing videos I've ever seen in my life, and I've watched it several times over. It's an animation of the conception to birth process. How when the egg is fertilized and begins to divide almost immediately, and the speed with which it divides, and how that everything that happens in that process has to be timed just right. There are hormones that are released. If they're released too early, it doesn't work. If they're released too late, it doesn't work. They have to be released at just the right moment. And somehow the body of the woman who is carrying this child, the body knows how to do that. She didn't learn how to do that. Excuse me, but her body knows how to do that. And the conclusion he comes to at the end of this video is, as a mathematician, there is no way possible that could happen by chance. No way possible. Take the spiritual out of it if you want to, but he said it has to be, at the very least, has to be intelligent design in order for this to happen. He doesn't mention the name God, but he says you can just do away with the happening by chance. Brain studies and findings are some of the most exciting things that are happening in the fields of psychology and counseling in my professional lifetime. Like I said a minute ago, one thing I want you to remember, we cannot control what thoughts come into our brains. We can control the thoughts, we can absolutely control the thoughts that stay in our brains. So from the temptation story of Jesus, we know where his mind was during that 40 days and 40 nights. But long before that and even after that, that is the mind of Jesus. We know where his mind was because it played out in his behavior. It played out in the way that he interacted with other people. It played out in the way that he loved other people, in the way that he forgave other people. That's where the mind of Jesus is. So, the question is, where is your mind? Where is my mind? Upon what do we allow ourselves to dwell? Because what we allow ourselves to dwell on is where our neural pathways are going to be strengthened. When you were a child, did anybody ever ask you in a fit of exasperation, what are you thinking? I've heard that. That's what we're going to do next week. I'm going to stand up here and say, what in the world are you thinking? And we're going to talk about some self-destructive neural ways that we can do our neural pathways, and we're also going to talk about some healthy ways that we can do that. So would you join me for just a brief word of prayer, please? Father in heaven, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight, and for these people who are here, and for this topic that we're discussing. Thank you for revealing to us all that you have revealed to us about our lives and our bodies and our brains and our behavior and help us to be your people first and foremost, whatever that may mean and whatever decisions we may need to make that happen. Help us, lead us, and guide us to be your people. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Those of you who really need to go, please feel free. If you want to stay around and talk a little bit more, I'm good with that too. But thank you again for being here. Hope you'll be able to come back next week.
As long as it doesn't. That's
Sorry?
the answer. As long as I'm